Doesn't everyone need to be close to medical intervention? And isn't it just like generally not safe to have a home birth? That's where I would push back a little bit. Actually, there are really, really safe ways to have a home birth that also allow for things to go wrong. Not only did I not feel any fear of dying, but I felt like I am truly living. In a world obsessed with convenience and quick fixes, I'm approaching wellness differently. After healing from chronic illness by overhauling my entire life, I'm now on a mission to help women like me to thrive and not just survive. I'm Kristen, and you're listening to the Organamama Podcast. Before we start our conversation today, I want to let you know that the Organamama's Guide to Mold is officially available, and it might just change your life. If you've ever wanted to hear directly from me about how to test your home for mold, how to hire the right mold professionals, how to prevent mold in your home, how to detox your body from mold, and how to go about house hunting when you want a mold-free place to live, this mini video course was made just for you. I've intentionally priced this guide to make it affordable for everyone because I firmly believe that cost shouldn't be the reason that you aren't able to be armed with mold knowledge. Check out today's show notes for the link and get started on the Organamama's Guide to Mold today. Welcome back to the Organamama Podcast. I'm Kristen, and today we're going to talk about all the things I'm doing to prepare for my home birth. I am having my third baby, and this is going to be my second home birth. Now, I realize that for some of you, this is probably a very familiar topic. You've been there, done that, you know all the ins and outs, but I remember what it was like for me as a first-time home birther, and I had a lot of questions about what all of the things would look like, whether or not it was actually safe, evidence-based to have a home birth. And so I can understand that there are probably some burning questions about how does it work? What do appointments look like? And what does the actual birth experience look like? So I'm going to do my best to recap some of the things that I went through during my first home birth, which was my second baby, and all the ways that I'm preparing for my next home birth for my third baby. My first baby was born in the hospital with a midwife group. It was an okay experience, but I definitely realized that I wanted something more independent for consecutive births after. And also, I think a big piece of it, there were two other big pieces to it as well. One was how my husband felt about it, and the second was the financial piece of it. So I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, what's the cost for a home birth? And I can't tell you exactly for what it's going to be in your own state or country, but I can tell you what it has been for me in two different states in the Midwest. So in Indiana in 2024, it was $5,000 for a home birth, which included all of my prenatal care and 2 to 3 postpartum visits, and the birth. And that does not get covered by insurance. So the only way to get that covered is if you are already part of like a Christian health share ministry like Samaritan or Medishare prior to becoming pregnant. Because if you sign up for them after you get pregnant, I don't think you qualify for pregnancy coverage and birth coverage. But if you're already part of Samaritan or Medishare, and I think there's one other that will cover a standard home birth, if you're already part of them before you get pregnant, you should be able to get your home birth covered. We were not a part of either of those for either of these home births. And so we have ended up having to pay out of pocket, which definitely does require saving up. And I also recognize that it is unfortunately out of reach for some families that truly just cannot afford $4,000 to $5,000 out of pocket for an experience like that. And that to me is probably one of the more heartbreaking realities of home birth, is that you do have to have a certain level of financial privilege to be able to do a home birth. There are certain home birth midwives around the United States that offer scholarships or coverage, but more often than not, you have to pay. So definitely if a home birth is something that you are considering for the future and you think the finances might be a tricky situation for you and you are a Christian, I would look into the Christian share ministries like Samaritan and Medishare, because they do cover, I believe, in most situations, they will cover the home birth costs. So that being said, my Indiana home birth was $5,000, and if we had paid in full by 36 weeks, it was $4,500, which we did because we obviously wanted to save $500. And then here in the Detroit area of Michigan, it's $5,000 for the whole thing. So just to be aware, just so you can plan ahead, that is something to think about. And most midwives allow you to do kind of like monthly installments over the course of your whole pregnancy, or you can kind of pay it all up front if you want to. You do usually have to do some kind of deposit with a home birth midwife, and that's like in your first trimester. And one question that I always had is, well, what if I have a loss? Will I be able to get that back? And most of the time, like it depends on the midwife, but a lot of times they either have a full refund policy where if you experience a miscarriage or a stillbirth, you can get that money refunded, or you can apply that deposit toward a future pregnancy. So just ask what your local options are. Ask them what their policies are on that. But that was always a question that I had regarding the financial piece. So what are appointments like? What is the difference between a home birth midwife and a hospital midwife and an OB and a doula? What are all the different people and what are all of their roles? Okay, so basically, there are two different kinds of midwives. Well, there's really three different kinds of midwives that exist, at least in the United States. I don't really know how it works for other countries, but I can tell you what it's like in the US. So there are certified nurse midwives, and these are usually the midwives that you're going to see that are practicing in the hospital. So these are nurses. They've gone through nursing school. They've been nurses, and then they go on to add a midwifery degree on top of their nursing degree. So they are trained in a hospital setting as a nurse before they are trained as a midwife. That is going to be probably the most like conventionally medically minded midwives. Not necessarily, but generally speaking, because they have that nursing background, they're going to be the most familiar with like medications and induction and things like that. And generally speaking, the nurse midwives are the ones that are practicing in hospitals, though not always. Sometimes they leave the hospital system and do home birth instead. The second type of midwife is certified nurse midwife. So they go through a usually state accredited midwifery program, which is long and intensive, and it requires them to do a lot of training under other midwives, and they go through a lot of births before they can become certified. They have a certain number of hours and a certain number of births that they have to complete. So it's a very long process to become a certified midwife, but they don't have the nursing degree that the CNMs have. So there's a difference between those two. And then you are going to have midwives with no accreditation that are not like certified through the state or the country to be midwives, and they're like more like off the table, if you were. That's not quite as common, but I do know that you can find them. But the risk that you run into there is just less certified, less like technically, I think sometimes those types of midwives would be considered like illegally attending your birth. So it would be more of like a free birth situation where you're taking on all the risk yourself, and you have a non-certified midwife who's present with you, but they don't actually have any kind of legal certifications as a midwife, even though they maybe have a lot of experience as a midwife. So there's different things to consider there. I have had both certified nurse midwives and certified midwives that have attended my births. I had a team of certified nurse midwives in the hospital. And then for my last home birth in Indiana and my home birth here, it was/will be certified midwife. So, prenatal appointments with a midwife for a home birth look very, very similar to prenatal appointments that you would have with an OB or with a midwife in a hospital setting. One of the main differences is that you are going to get a much, much longer appointment, and it's usually not going to be in a hospital setting. It'll be usually in an office or a clinic that the midwife practices out of or has an office in. Some home birth midwives partner up with birth centers, and so they'll do prenatal appointments at a birth center, and some of them just come to your home. So it really just depends on the midwife, but both of the home birth midwives that I've had have a office, like a clinic and an office that they're in where you go for your prenatal appointments. And so again, it's going to vary depending on the midwife, but they're going to be checking your blood pressure. They're going to be offering to listen to your baby's heartbeat with a Doppler. They're going to be asking you how you've been feeling. They're going to ask what your nutrition and your hydration have looked like. Any weird symptoms? Are you having Braxton Hicks contractions? How are you sleeping at night? What supplements are you taking? So just kind of the regular kinds of questions questions. But from my personal experience, the home birth midwives that I have seen ask much more in-depth questions and also are a little bit more on top of things like nutrition. When I went through my hospital birth experience with a midwife team, I felt like they would answer questions that I would have, but they rarely were asking me questions. Like, what does a day, like a regular day of eating look like? Both of my home birth midwives will ask me that every time I go, versus in the hospital, that was really only a question if it was my question of like, what should a regular day of eating look like for me? If I asked that, then they would maybe have some answers. But for home birth midwives, they want to know, what am I eating? How much am I sleeping? How much water am I drinking? What supplements am I taking? They really care about making sure that my nutrition and my health are on point. Because the thing is if you have kind of an unhealthy pregnancy, your odds of being able to legally have a baby at home can go down. So especially a lot of midwives can't attend a home birth unless you're 37 weeks or beyond. And so they want to make sure that you are in tip-top shape so that you can make it to that 37-week point and you're not going into preterm labor or you're not being diagnosed with preeclampsia at 35 weeks, because then, you can't have a home birth in most states. Now, obviously, you can always decline policy because it's your baby, it's your body, it's your decision. But a lot of these midwives are like state mandated or federally mandated to have certain requirements, like they can't legally attend your birth if it's before 37 weeks. And so they would have to recommend that you go to a hospital, but you could choose to free birth, I guess, if you wanted to, but that's probably not necessarily the wisest decision if they're recommending that you go to a hospital. So they really, really, really care about making sure that you are as healthy as possible to reach full term and to not have any complications, because they don't want you to have complications, because they want to make sure that you have the most wonderful, calm, amazing home birth experience as possible in your own home. So you go through your pregnancy. Usually through the second trimester, you're seeing your midwife once a month for your prenatal appointments, and they can also schedule you out for things like blood work, like an OB panel for the genetic screening. They can schedule you to a third-party lab for ultrasounds if you want. It's totally up to you. And a lot of the things that are different between a home birth midwife and a hospital midwife is you're going to recognize that more often than not, they're leaving all the decisions up to you. They're going to say, hey, here's my thoughts, but it's your choice, rather than, oh, this is standard. What we standardly do is we have an ultrasound here, an ultrasound here. They'll just say, hey, some people choose to do this, and here's the pros and cons, and then you can decide what you'd want. And so I actually really appreciate that, because I think that they are really, really great about informed consent. And obviously, I've only worked with 2 home birth midwives. My experience is very minuscule compared to the hundreds and thousands of midwives that are out there. So there are good ones, there are not so good ones. And that's true of all birth environments, home, birth center, hospital. You're going to have good birth workers and ones that aren't so good. So just because it's been my experience doesn't mean that that's true of all home birth midwives, but this is generally speaking the general consensus on how things go for home birth. Once you hit that third trimester, you're going to be seeing your provider probably every other week, starting around like 28 or 30 weeks. And then once you hit that like 36 or 37 week mark, you'll be seeing them once a week for a prenatal appointment. And they do really, again, a lot of the same things that you would be doing in an OB. Like if you hit 40 weeks and they feel like you need non-stress tests, they'll schedule you for a non-stress test. If they feel like you need to have an ultrasound, they're going to schedule you for an ultrasound. They're not like operating out of the Stone Age. And a lot of these home birth midwives also have access to a lot of different medications they can administer during labor and birth. Like a lot of them have access to Pitocin that they can use for like not necessarily during labor. They're not going to be using Pitocin, but they can inject Pitocin if they're concerned about postpartum hemorrhaging to help kind of close up the uterus. So they do have a lot of different medical technologies that are at their disposal for home use. And so that's the other thing is a common question I receive is, well, so what about emergencies? Like, I'm so worried that something would go wrong and I just want to be, steps away from medical intervention in the hospital if something were to go wrong. And I'll just straight up say, like, if you are full of fear about something going wrong and you personally want to be steps away from like an OR to have a C-section, or you want to be able to immediately access an epidural or immediately access an IV, home birth might not be the right choice for you. But if you're thinking, well, doesn't everyone need to be close to, medical intervention? And isn't it just like generally not safe to have a home birth? That's where I would push back a little bit and say, actually, there are really, really safe ways to have a home birth that also allow for things to go wrong. Because the truth is, with birth, things can and do go wrong. Not all the time, not even most of the time. And generally speaking, God has designed our bodies to give birth and to do so effectively. But we live in a fallen world, and that's not always how it pans out. Tragedies happen, emergencies happen, and in those situations, I am incredibly grateful for life-saving medicine. Heck, I'm married to an ER doctor. You guys better believe that I'm grateful for life-saving medicine. And when modern medicine needs to step in to save a life when it is truly needed, gosh, I'm grateful that that exists, because 200, 300 years ago, someone would just die rather than being saved. So I'm so grateful that that exists. I also equally believe that medical intervention is way overused in the modern birth setting. I think that induction and Pitocin and C-sections and epidurals are pushed way, 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 way harder and lead to a cascade of interventions. I think they are promoted and pushed way harder than they need to be. Now, that's not to say that I'm criticizing or judging you if you've chosen any of those things for yourself, because that is absolutely 100% your choice to make an informed decision for yourself. And there should be no shaming of moms who make a decision that feels the best to them. However, I do think there's a lot of moms that are pushed into interventions when that was not part of their plan and not what they wanted. And they're kind of bullied into choosing or doing or accepting certain things in the birth setting when it's maybe not actually necessary. And doctors are amazing. OBs are wonderful, and they know how to save a life. They know how to prevent mother and baby from dying. But what they maybe aren't always the best at compared to some midwives that are out there is really honoring and welcoming the physiological process of birth without intervening. And I think that because their main goal in the hospital setting is to prevent you and your baby from dying, that's kind of the lens they're seeing through, which I completely understand. And OBs are trained surgeons. They like doing surgery. They like doing C-sections. And so it's just a totally different perspective versus a home birth midwife who can't do surgery. Their main goal actually isn't to just keep you from dying. Their main goal is to support you in your natural body's way of giving birth. So I think they don't want you to die, and they don't want your baby to die. And it is one of their goals to prevent that from happening, but that's not their only goal. And again, I'm making generalizations here across the board. Generally speaking, this isn't true of all midwives, and what I said before isn't true of all OBs. There's good ones, there's bad ones. Please hear me when I say that. But I am making a generalization by saying that midwives, especially the ones that are doing home birth, are there to not only keep you from dying, but help you to really live. And that is what I experienced with my second home birth. Was not only did I not die, I loved it. It was so freaking fun. Oh my gosh. I can only hope and pray that this upcoming birth is going to be just as good of an experience as my first home birth was with my second baby, because not only did I not feel any fear of dying, but I felt like I am truly living. And giving birth was probably the closest thing I've ever experienced to being on crazy drugs in a good way. It felt like the coolest high of all time. And I think that a huge part of that was being comfortable and safe in my own home and trusting my body to truly do its thing. And it was an unmatched experience that I just only hope I can experience again. Quick sidebar before we get back to today's topic. I've tried a lot of non-toxic laundry detergents and they either don't really clean my clothes or they're just way too expensive. In 2024, I finally decided to try Truly Free's liquid laundry detergent and I was honestly just blown away by A, how effective it was at cleaning my nasty clothes, and B, how stinking affordable it was, like even cheaper per load than Tide. If you want to try my absolute favorite non-toxic laundry detergent from Truly Free, you can find the link in today's show notes. All right, back to the episode. So, what am I doing to prepare for a home birth to hopefully encourage my body to have a similar experience to my last home birth? Well, there's a lot of things I'm doing. The first thing is I am really focused on nutrition. After I got through a very difficult first trimester, I really honed in on nutrition because if you have seen any of my birth stories or know anything about my birth history, I historically give birth to big babies, which you may know that I actually have a little bit of a problem with because during my second home birth, prenatal appointments, I chatted a lot with my midwife and she was basically like, look, if you have a normal BMI, it is not normal or necessarily an indication of health to have a baby that's like over 10 pounds. And my first baby was 10 and a half, and I had passed the gestational diabetes test, so I thought I was in the clear. But then what happened was with my second baby, I took my blood sugar for like 3 weeks straight, pricking my finger 3 times a day from 28 weeks through, 31 maybe. And the initial results of that for those first few days of testing were kind of wild. So, your insulin regulation in pregnancy is different than your insulin regulation when you're not pregnant because the hormones that are coming from your placenta can change how your body interacts with sugar and insulin. And so when you maybe don't have, blood sugar issues when you're not pregnant, you still can have them while pregnant, and it's not really an indication of how healthy of a person you are. So for me, as someone who ate like nutrient-dense foods, like not a lot of processed stuff, especially in my second pregnancy, it was pretty shocking to see that my blood sugar numbers were wildly off the charts, like just not good. My fasting blood sugar in the morning was way too high. And then after eating breakfast, my blood sugar was spiking like crazy. And then an hour later than that, it was still spiking like crazy, which neither of those things are good. So, I realized like, wow, I really need to hone in on my nutrition to help my baby not get so big. And so I think there is obviously a genetic component to it, but there's a massive nutrition component to the size of your baby and how your body is tolerating and interacting with insulin and blood sugar. And so I worked super, super hard to basically follow a loose gestational diabetes diet plan during the rest of my second pregnancy. So that involved lots of protein, only eating carbs if it was paired with protein and fat. Like I would never eat carbs by themselves. I had basically no sugar at all, like no processed sugar specifically. And I didn't even eat dates because everyone's like, oh, eat dates to prepare your cervix. I didn't even do that because dates are a lot of sugar. And so for somebody who was trying to watch my blood sugar levels, I didn't eat dates at all in my second pregnancy. And then I worked a lot on walking every day with an elevated heart rate and also drinking lots of mineralized fluids. And then my second baby ended up not being 10 and a half pounds. He was 9 pounds. And that was I was much happier with the weight of my second baby. And so I will be doing the same kind of process this time around to prepare for my home birth because obviously a 10 and a half pound baby is going to have a little bit of a different laboring experience than a 9 pound baby or an 8 pound baby. And maybe I can have an 8 pound baby this time. That'd be great. But yeah, so I'm just, again, focusing on all the same things about my nutrition. And then, I'll, doing blood sugar testing starting around 28 weeks, making sure that those numbers are solid and continuing to test periodically throughout the rest of pregnancy to just check in. How's my insulin regulation doing? How's my blood sugar handling different foods? Eating a really protein heavy snack right before bed was kind of one of my secret sauces to having better blood sugar numbers and helping with that fasting blood sugar number. So I usually ate a big bowl of Greek yogurt before bed, and that really did the trick for me of getting my fasting blood sugar first thing in the morning down much lower, and then helping me stay more regulated throughout the day. So I will be heavily focusing, or I am heavily focusing on nutrition currently and for the rest of the pregnancy leading up to birth, because what you're eating does impact how your birth experience goes. And also focusing on lots of dark leafy greens. There is research that points that eating lots of dark leafy greens actually protects your perineum and limits the risk of perineal tearing. And so focusing on things like broccoli and cauliflower actually counts as a dark leafy green, even though it's not dark and it's white. But cauliflower, broccoli, spring mix, microgreens, spinach, choosing organic and even hydroponic when you can to reduce pesticide and lead exposure from those things is great. But focusing on lots of good fiber during pregnancy, those things I'm doing and will continue to do all the way through the rest of the pregnancy. And lots of fluids and lots of minerals. Those are so important. And then, the right kind of exercise. For me, I like to mostly focus on walking every day for 30 or more minutes with an elevated heart rate. And then I'm also going to pelvic floor therapy. And so they have certain exercises that they're recommending for me to help limit my amount of like SI pain and pubic pain, which usually are pretty hard for me at the end of pregnancy specifically. So seeing a pelvic floor PT through my whole pregnancy has been such a win for me because they're really helping me to limit my pain and focus on a relaxed and in tune pelvic floor, which really helps with pushing for when you're birthing your baby. So I highly recommend that if you're not already seeing a pelvic floor PT and you're pregnant, get it on the books ASAP. And a lot of times, if you have a standard insurance, they will cover a certain number of PT of like pelvic floor PT appointments per year. So be sure to look into that based on what your insurance looks like. But yes. Okay. Also, there is a lot that you have to prepare for physically and mentally. If this is your first experience shooting for an unmedicated birth, then it's different. Like I've never had an epidural, but I know from chatting with friends who have that going unmedicated versus having an epidural are pretty different experiences. And it does require a certain level of like mental preparedness, because with a home birth, it's different than a hospital birth. With a hospital birth, you could show up and say, well, I really want to go unmedicated. But you kind of always know, or you may know that the epidural is still kind of an option for you if you choose to change your mind. With a home birth, as long as you're at home, it's not an option. You'd have to transfer to a hospital and birth your baby at the hospital if you wanted to have an epidural, which people do, especially if their labor has ended up being a lot longer than they anticipated and they're either maybe experiencing back labor or just been laboring for like 2 or 3 days and they haven't slept and they just need to sleep. Sometimes the best choice is to transfer to the hospital, get an epidural, get some sleep, and just get yourself in a better mental place where you can deliver your baby confidently in the hospital. That's never anyone's first choice plan, but sometimes that happens. And I think that a lot of times those types of hospital transfers are the right decision, because even if you really want to have your baby at home, sometimes you just need to transfer so that you can eat, sleep, especially if you've been having a 3, 4, 5 day labor. That's a long time to be having contractions and not sleeping. So again, those are the situations where I'm grateful where modern medicine exists to give us a hand in our moments of need. But having a baby is hard work. So you can't necessarily expect to plan for a home birth and have it just be like painless or not intense at all. Like having a baby is generally very intense. And so I think that it can be extremely helpful to do some mental and physical preparation for that experience so that when you get to it, you're like, I know what to do. I feel confident. And that's not to say that fear or worry or anxiety might not pop up during your birth experience, because it certainly may. But I do think that if you can prepare yourself as best as possible beforehand, you're going to be in a way better situation than if you don't. So here's what I do. This is my third baby, and it'll be my third baby with no pain relief. So it's a little different when you're on your consecutive children. But if you're having your first or maybe your first unmedicated birth, there are certain things that you want to consider. First of all, contractions, especially near the end, can be very, 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 very intense. And it may be the most intense thing you've ever experienced before. So if you're not mentally prepared for that, it can take you by surprise. We really love the Bradley method, which is a birth class that you can take. Usually they have local in-person classes that last maybe 2 or 3 months. But I also think that there's online options that are available for taking it, and there's a book too. But the Bradley method is really great because it not only teaches you all of the physiological aspects of natural labor, it also brings your partner in as well and teaches them how to support you and do it as a team rather than it just being the mom is in pain and crying and the dad is standing off to the side like, oh, I don't know what to do. This is hard to watch. Like, the Bradley method basically encourages your spouse to be your birth coach, and you practice for it. And so I always tell people, oh yeah, usually around like 32 weeks, I start practicing for labor. And they're like, what the heck does that mean? So here's what it means. So usually, and because it's my third baby, we'll probably not do this as intensely as we have in the past, just because we kind of already know how it goes. But specifically for my first and second, we did this a lot where at nighttime, we would be laying in bed and then we would practice contractions. And so my husband there's 2 ways to do it. You can either squeeze the pregnant woman's arm, like pretty hard enough that it's uncomfortable, but not so hard that you're going to leave a bruise. But you squeeze the arm pretty hard, and you do it for the duration of a contraction. Now, contractions don't just come on all of a sudden intense. They grow in intensity, they peak in intensity, and then they lessen. So it's like a mountain. You go up, you peak, and then you come down. And so practicing that is really helpful because then you kind of are prepared for what the sensations are going to feel like. And so what Nick would do is he would grab my arm, he would start to squeeze very softly and slowly build up the intensity of that squeeze until it was pretty uncomfortable. And then he would gradually lessen. And that whole thing would take about 1 minute, which is a pretty standard contraction length. Near the end of labor, some women have contractions that are a little bit longer than a minute, but on average, you can kind of expect a contraction to last about a minute or a minute and a half. And so we would practice that. And I would practice laying there and relaxing every single muscle in my entire body. I would think about, am I raising my eyebrows? Okay, I need to drop my eyebrows. Am I clenching my jaw? Okay, I need to relax my jaw. Are my shoulders tight up against my ears? I need to drop them. Are my toes clenched? I need to unclench them. So I would literally think through from the top of my head. I would slowly roll all the way down my body from the top of my head to my shoulders, to my chest, to my fingertips, down to my knees, all the way to my toes, and think, am I fully relaxed right now? And we would do that every single night for like 10 to 15 minutes. Another way you can do it without doing the squeezing is just put like an ice pack on the top of mom's back, like on the back of her neck, directly on the skin, because ice gets kind of cold, you know? And it grows in intensity, right? Like when you get that ice on you, it feels more intense the longer you leave it there. The one thing you can't really mimic is like it lessening in intensity necessarily, but you can still do something very similar to like the arm squeeze with using an ice pack. So practice labor with your spouse. Have them watch your face and remind you, hey, you're clenching your eyebrows or your jaw is tight. You need to relax. So have them start watching you and learn what you tend to tighten up, because the more tight you are, the more intense contractions feel. So the more you can relax and loosen and breathe deeply, the less intense your contraction will feel. And it's counterintuitive, right? Because when we experience pain, we want to clench up, we want to tighten, we want to be tight and tight and tight. But actually, when you loosen and relax, it's a little easier to manage. And it's actually for this reason that I decline to use things like birth combs. Birth combs some people really love them. It's a method of kind of counteracting the intensity of a contraction by, like, when you feel that intensity in your abdomen area, you squeeze these combs in your hand, and it kind of spreads this sensation out across your hand, and it's uncomfortable on your hand, but you focus on the discomfort in your hand versus in your belly. Some people love them. I personally do not use them because I want to be fully relaxed through my whole body rather than promoting tension in a different area of my body. So you decide what you think works best for you. Personally, I like to fully relax in all of the ways. So we will be doing labor practice together to prepare for our home birth, which we've done both of our previous pregnancies, and that has been extremely helpful. So practice with your partner of what you're going to do during contractions. You can also have them practice different positions with you that involve two people, such as them squeezing your hips during contractions. That counter pressure can really help sometimes. You can put your arms around their neck and relax and lean on them while you pretend to experience a contraction. But if you get into the habit of practicing like labor positions and labor noises even, you're going to feel a little bit less weird about it when you're actually experiencing it. I'm also a heavy mooer. So when I'm experiencing really intense contractions, we do have this, like as humans, we have this tendency to want to take our voice high. Like when you're experiencing pain, you may want to go, ah, like that, right? Well, that high-pitched voice is actually going to promote tension in your body. And so if you want to vocalize during a contraction, which is a very normal instinct, you actually want to take your voice low, like a cow, to moo. And so I like to moo during labor. And so when I experience a really intense contraction, instead of going, ah, I take my voice down and I go, moo. It sounds very weird, but I promise you it works amazingly. It's that open glottis sound, and it actually helps to loosen your pelvic floor because your voice box and your tongue and this part of your mouth is connected to your pelvic floor, which is so crazy, but all that fascia is connected. And so when you can relax your chest and open it up and keep your voice low and open, it actually helps to relax your pelvic floor, can help you to dilate further, and it also can help you to push your baby out more easily, which is amazing. So I like to practice that. And it sounds weird, totally, but if you're in the habit of already doing it beforehand, it won't feel weird to you when you're in actual labor. And also your partner will be more used to you making those noises because you don't want to freak them out when you're going through labor and then you start moving like a cow. They're like, what the heck is happening? It's much better for you to prepare them. I was like, hey, I'm going to practice my labor sounds. And then you can have your like sexy little moment where they're squeezing your arm and you're mooing like a cow. So hot. Okay, so we do a lot of labor practice. We find that to be super helpful. Another thing that I really like to do pretty much every single night once I hit middle of the second trimester is an Epsom salt bath, and I listen to the Christian Hypnobirthing audio tracks. Christian Hypnobirthing was started by my friend Tara. She is amazing. She lives in Australia, and she has the most incredible faith in Jesus, and she's also created these beautiful audio tracks with Bible-based, Christian-based affirmations. So it's not like these like manifestations of like, I'm shouting into the universe that my birth is going to be successful. I'm not into that woo-woo stuff, to be honest. I want my birth to be all centered on Jesus Christ. And so Tara has done an amazing job of putting together these audio tracks that you can listen to throughout your whole pregnancy. There's a first trimester one. I think there might even be a miscarriage track. But for all stages of wherever you're at with pregnancy or even loss, she has these beautiful tracks that are, I don't know, I think between 8 and 10 or 15 minutes long each, focusing on different aspects of things to meditate on of God's truth and Christ's goodness while you go through labor. I have used them through every single pregnancy so far, and they are just incredible ways to meditate on scripture and be reminded of what God has in store for you and your child. And it truly has been such a game-changing experience. So what I like to do is to do a bath every night, and it's helpful to keep your bathwater temperature under like 101 degrees. When I'm not pregnant, I usually like my bath water to be at like 106, really, really hot. But when you're pregnant, for your baby's sake, you want to keep that under like 102 or 101. And most likely your home birth midwife will suggest that your water, if you have a birth tub, they want your water to be at like 100 degrees and not much above that, just because your baby may be coming out into that water and you wouldn't want to burn them. And so I like to actually practice with that water temperature during pregnancy so that I'm not like irritated with it when I'm giving birth. I'm like, it's too cold. So I try to get used to that like 101 degree temperature water during pregnancy. So I have this like thermometer that I keep in my bathtub, and I'll, check my water temperature and try to keep it around there. And then I do Epsom salt, which is a great form of magnesium that can be absorbed dermally, which is a great way to help your body relax. And our bodies usually crave so much magnesium when we're pregnant. So Epsom salt bath is a great way to get a little bit of magnesium in every night. And then I'll listen to the Christian hypnobirthing tracks, and then I will just lay in the bathtub and practice my relaxing from the top of my head all the way down to my toes. And again, that practice of learning to relax is so key in being able to confidently handle the intensity of contractions, especially when you get close to that transition phase, which is right before your baby comes. And so I find that the more that you think about it during pregnancy and the more you practice it during pregnancy, the more success you're going to experience with your labor. So Christian hypnobirthing tracks, I will link those below in the show notes for you guys. They are truly incredible. I would not do my pregnancies without them. And then pretty much those are the main things that I'm preparing for home birth. Other kind of specific things that you may want to think about is, do you think you'll want to have your baby in the water? Do you think you'll want to have your baby in your bed? You may not know, and you may just want to have both options available to you. I think one thing that I wish I would have told myself before my second is there does seem to be this kind of like stigma around home birth from home birthing moms that the ideal situation is to have your baby in a birth pool. I will say that I liked being in the birth pool with my second, but I'm not convinced that I will want to push a baby out in water this time. Like maybe I will, but maybe I won't. And I just want you to know that if you maybe prefer the feeling of gravity, you might like giving birth not in the water better. And I'm a gravity girl. Feels like a weird thing to say. I like the feeling of the weight of my body. And I honestly felt a little bothered by how weightless I felt in the water when I was laboring in the water and birthed my son in the water. I almost wished that I could feel gravity more. And so we'll see. Maybe I'll labor some in a tub this time. Maybe I won't. Maybe I'll give birth on a bed, or maybe I'll give birth on the floor, or I don't know. Maybe I will be in the water. I'm not sure. I just want you to know to give yourself the freedom to choose something that's not the water if that's not where you feel the most comfortable. Like, don't feel like you just have to have your baby in the water because that's the most aesthetic or the most like cool home birth thing to do. Like, you can have your baby wherever you want. I love the Earthside birth pools. We have one. I don't even know if we'll inflate it this time though, because our bathroom in our house here has a pretty big tub. So if I do decide that I want to labor in the water or birth in the water, we probably just fill up our own bathtub. But Earthside birth pools are these beautiful white inflatable pools. They're phthalate free. I really love them. So I can also link those below if you want to look up the birth pools, but also most likely your home birth midwife has a birth pool that you can either buy or rent from them. So be sure to ask. But if you're looking for something that's more aesthetic, the majority of like rental pools are blue. So if you want, like if you're going to have a photographer there, or you want something more aesthetic for your, like if you're going to take any content, and you would prefer something white, Earthside birth pools is a great place to get that from. You can't rent them as far as I know. I think you have to buy it. So just be prepared that it's a bit of a cost. But if you're trying to keep costs low, ask your midwife if they have a pool that you can either use or rent from them, because most of them usually do have that. And then your midwife is also going to give you a list of supplies to have on hand. The most important thing to have is towels, lots and lots of towels, especially if you have your baby in the water, because there'll be lots of dripping as you get out, and baby will have to get dried. You'll have to get dried. It's like there's, blood and water and all that stuff. So having lots of kind of throwaway cotton towels is really helpful, as well as like just... yeah, like have a massive pile of towels. That's very helpful. And then also, if you are planning to labor or push your baby out in the water, your midwife will probably tell you this, but you should have a fish scooper in case anything comes out of your body before the baby, something brown. They will use a fish scooper to just like scoop it out and remove it. And it's not weird at all, I promise. But they like you to have one of those just so that they don't have to fish anything out with their hands. Just makes it a little quicker and easier. So, but again, they'll give you a list of supplies that they want you to have. And then the last thing that you will want to do when you are preparing for a home birth is having a backup plan. So I think it is very, very wise to have a plan for, okay, so if I am at home, hopefully things will go smoothly, everything will be fine, and I'll just get to labor and birth and have initial postpartum at home with my baby, and we'll be good. But things can happen. And so it is important to have a backup plan. And again, your midwife will most likely have instructions for you and will have a conversation or multiple conversations with you about planning all of this out. But you'll want to kind of determine, okay, if I need to transfer to a hospital, but it's not an emergency situation, what is the hospital within driving distance that I'd want to go to the most? But maybe it doesn't necessarily have to be the closest one, but which one would I just want to go to the most? So that one you would want to have written down of like, this is where I would go if it wasn't an emergency, but I wanted to transfer. Then you would want to know what hospital is the actual closest hospital that like deals with babies and birth. So like we fortunately here have one that's like 5 minutes away if something were to happen, with a maternity ward and a NICU as well. And then that's the other thing too, is you want to look and see like which hospital is the closest hospital with a NICU. If your baby were to need to transfer after birth, or if you were having a complication during birth that made them think that baby would need medical assistance after birth, then you would want to know, okay, which hospital is the closest that has a NICU, because not all hospitals do. And so, yeah, you'll basically kind of work through this list of the different backup plans in case of any kind of transfer or medical emergency. And then you would want to think through, okay, if there was an emergency, would we use one of our cars? Would we call an ambulance? What would be the quickest scenario? So usually your midwife will talk through all of that with you. And I will say, if you have a midwife who's like, we don't transfer, you won't need to transfer, it's not likely, that's probably not the best midwife in my opinion. If they have kind of a chip on their shoulder regarding not wanting to interact with hospitals or not wanting to transfer, they might not be the right choice. At least they wouldn't be the right choice for me, because I want a midwife who has a healthy respect for birth and for the potential dangers that may accompany birth. Even though it's not likely that something will happen, it can happen. And so I want a midwife who has a good relationship with local hospitals and has a healthy respect for the fact that we live in a fallen world and things can go wrong, and would be happy to support a hospital transfer if it's medically necessary. And so that's a question that you can ask when you're interviewing midwives, like, hey, what are your thoughts on transfer? What's your transfer rate? What kind of relationships do you have with hospitals around here? That can really kind of give you some insight into what they think and what they would do in an emergency situation. So that's pretty much it of all the things I'm doing to prepare for home birth. Otherwise, I'm excited. I can't wait. I love laboring at home. I love not having to be in labor in the car. And I'm hoping that my experience this time will be just as good as my last one. But obviously, you never know what can happen. But I do think that having a positive, excited mindset about birth is a healthier mindset than just being terrified and negative about it. And if you do have fears or concerns or worries, I think it can be helpful to talk about those with your partner, talk about them with God, hire a doula who can talk through some of your anxieties regarding birth. And I do have a doula that's hired as well. As a third-time mom, I think it's kind of like 50-50 on really if I need one, but I like to have somebody who's present who can specifically help me with things like positioning and making sure I'm eating and drinking during labor, so that my husband doesn't have to worry about those things and he can truly just be there to provide the support I need, and then have an additional support from a doula. They're not midwives. Doulas are just birth support. So they can't like administer drugs. They can't supervise a birth. Like they can't be considered the midwife that's there. They are just like an emotional, physical support person for you during labor and birth. But I love having a doula present. I think it's a great, great choice. And again, you want to interview your doula to make sure that you're the right fit, that you vibe with them, and that you guys have good positive interactions with each other. But a doula can be so, so helpful. So I do have a doula hired who loves Jesus and has had a bunch of kids herself. So I'm excited to have her around too. And that's another thing I did to prepare for my home birth. But otherwise, yeah, I think it's just focusing on like a positive, Christ-centered mindset and trusting that Jesus has the perfect plan for me and my baby, and that whatever he wants to happen is going to happen. And I just need to trust the process and trust the team that I have hired to be there with me and get excited, because birth is crazy and transformative and amazing. And like I said before, kind of feels like being on drugs in a good way. And I'm excited for it. So that's pretty much it that we have for today. Thanks for joining me for this episode of the Organamama podcast, and I can't wait to catch you next time. Hey friend, thanks for listening to today's episode of the Organamama podcast. If you're looking for more ways to dive deeper into low tox living, I want to tell you about my Organa Guides. In 2024, I wrote a series of digital guides that walks you through exactly how to rid your home of toxic possessions and chemicals, from kitchen equipment to bedding to paint to baby toys to your clothes and accessories. You'll learn exactly what materials and ingredients to avoid, what materials and ingredients are safe, and which brands and products I recommend as good, healthy options for your family. Listeners of the Organamama podcast can get 20% off any of my Organa Guides using code PODCAST, and I've linked all the guides in the show notes for you below. As always, do your best and let go of the rest. Bye for now.